I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
As modernity has created promises that it has no ability to keep. What this means is that we're a society of disembedded individuals, stuck in the impossible situation of being alone together. And what was understood as emancipation has proved to be a form of isolation. It is important to understand that what I am telling you is not simply a cultural history. It's a description of the story that shapes every single person that you know. This is why there is a rise in mental illness. It's absolutely concurrent with the disembedding of the individual, because individuals can't constitute themselves by the very nature of the case. Subjectivity cannot sustain its own weight. We need others to tell us. But we've been given an ethical mandate by the Enlightenment that tells us that that's immoral, that nobody should constrain us.
Hi, we're back with another Dustbowl Diatribes. And remember, we'll be doing a Secret Grange version later this month, so be on the lookout for that. We're here today with Nat Bjerke-Harvey. Did I do a good job?
Yeah, that was it. You got it.
All right. Yes. He heads up Piccalilli Farm with his wife, Allison, and they are from Manhattan, Kansas. And we're here to just talk to him about his own experience with running a local diversified farm, doing organic farming. So Nat, do you want to say some things about yourself first? Just kind of introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Piccalilli Farm has been this will be the start of our 10th season here outside of Manhattan. We farm on 60 acres total. We do organic vegetable production on approximately 2 acres, about a little less than a quarter acre of that is undercover, and by that I mean, inside of a tunnel. The rest is open field production. The remaining acreage of our property, about 40 acres of it, is true Flint Hills tall grass prairie, so very thin topsoil, very nice pasture. There's another 15 acres or so of woodlot that we manage, both in sort of a silvopasture sort of context, but also just as woodlot to heat our home. Yeah, we have both been full time on our farm since 2020. My wife and I are both first generation farmers. So we did not inherit this land. We did not inherit any infrastructure. We come to the profession of small scale agriculture really from a perspective of pretty passionate seasonal eaters. Primarily, I would say. Certainly we don't, I don't think about what we do here as homesteading, but as we built the concept of what our farm was going to be, being able to grow and raise our own food is certainly an important component to that. But, that evolves more and more into what is a functional small farm business model, as well as feeding us. We do about 500 to 700 meat birds a year, rotated on pasture. We manage a flock of 200 to 250 layers. We milk dairy goats. My wife and I, prior to buying this farm, had been cheesemakers at a small farmstead dairy outside of Champaign-Urbana called Prairie Fruits Farm. It was a goat dairy. We were there for 3 years, both as cheesemakers and, herd manager roles. And we bought this farm with the intention that we were going to build a dairy and a creamery. But as we are first generation and, cheesemakers are not exactly high on the hog lifestyle wise, financing the construction of the additional infrastructure for the dairy and the creamery has sort of remained out of reach for us. But the other thing that has happened over the course of the years is what we've done here has become ends unto themselves, in the sense that, we make a living here off of what we do. It's certainly not I'm not wealthy, but we're comfortable for what we need, I guess, anyway. And those sort of low capital intensive enterprises that were at the start of what we do, they just have grown organically, and it's been a pretty significant process of reinvestment. We both started when we bought the farm working off farm in some capacity. Myself for the first 3 years, working both as a cook in town, and then eventually I managed a cheese shop that was briefly in Manhattan. And my wife was a baking instructor at the American Institute of Baking, which is sort of a commercial bakery school in Manhattan.
Yeah.
We are both college graduates who really were much more interested in food than I think we were in our academic careers. I started working in restaurants towards the end of high school, and I did all through college. And Allison, in more of a bakery component, has done something similar in terms of sort of, I guess, the elevation of fine dining, of how far we got in our culinary careers. She certainly got a lot further than I did. But both of us come to this lifestyle and the choices of what we do here from, a perspective of an educated eater, first and foremost.
Okay. So like going back a little bit, like how did you get to the point where, at what point in your life, was it when you were a teenager, when you were like, I just really like food, the field of culinary pursuit,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. My mother's sister, I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Was a chef. And in the mid 90s, she started a nonprofit called Fresh Farm Market, which was one of the first producer only farmers market networks in the United States. It's now a pretty huge nonprofit. It operates markets throughout the DC, Annapolis, Baltimore, Northern Virginia area. I mean, I think there's markets every day somewhere in that area. And I grew up volunteering there. Their first market was in downtown DC in the DuPont Circle neighborhood. But she had always been a pretty strong culinary force in my life. And from a very early age, sort of cultivated an interest in food. In college, at some point towards the end of my career, I was working in a restaurant where I saw the first sort of machinations I had seen of, a farmer arriving at a restaurant and dropping food off seasonally, what he was producing seasonally, and seeing the way that didn't take a lot to coax something really delicious out of it, was really inspiring to me, and seemed like a lot more of a sort of a natural symbiotic relationship than the big distributor food truck that pulled up and unloaded all the chicken tenders. And then there's periods in my life where I read a lot of early Michael Pollan books, and I was super interested in that. So I left Ann Arbor. I had an undergraduate degree in history from University of Michigan. I majored in history. I minored in Latin American politics and Russian literature. I was fairly certain I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't want to go back to school after I finished my undergraduate degree. And I woofed for about a year and a half after I graduated college, and then worked as harvest help for a pretty big organic farm outside of Washington, D.C. that sold in the same markets that I had volunteered at years before. So, my dad says, that it just seemed like you were always really interested in food, which he, says with a wisp of disappointment, because I've maybe not used the college degree that he helped pay for to its fullest. But
I'm sure you have. That's the thing.
but yeah, that's the general trajectory in terms of. At some point, I ended up in Chicago following a girl, and I was working in restaurants there, and I was in my mid-20s and was just a little bit interested in not working as many nights, and I took a job at a retail cheese counter that it's a cut to order, very fancy cheese shop that sort of specialized in not only sort of old world traditional cheeses, but also the American artisan cheese movement, and that there was a really an aha moment for me where I saw the link between the small farm dairy creamery and the small farm vegetable experience I had before. And I was particularly inspired. I mean, the traditions of cheese making, particularly in terms of highly perishable goat cheeses, which is what I was sort of most fascinated about in France, is that there's one goat cheese maker for the village, and they make all the cheese. And there's a very close relationship there. And as I was thinking more and more about like localized food communities and eating seasonally and trying to be a food producer, I really liked that the way small scale cheese making fit into that. And we in Chicago, and that's also where I met my wife Allison, at that same cheese counter. And as I think we were both cooks, I think we were both sort of fascinated by, there's something magic that we take this very sort of unflavorful white fluid and can turn it into a million different fermented cheese products. So we were both sort of fascinated in that science piece of it. And one of the local creameries that we worked very closely with there at that cheese shop was, hiring cheesemakers, and my wife and I took jobs there. And she had been their retail person at the farmers market as well. I mean, we both had jobs in the farmers markets in Chicago, just to sort of, big urban farmers markets, I think, are a delight. I did glean, Spencer, from some of the other podcasts that maybe you're not the biggest fan of farmers markets. I hope maybe I can convince you a little bit otherwise in this discussion. But big city farmers markets for me are a joy, just because. Well, I think about farmers markets in the sense that I think about there's only a small percentage of every population that's going to engage with the rigmarole of shopping at markets. And when you get into densely packed urban environments, that percentage of the population skyrockets. So there's just, as a producer, there's a lot more opportunity to sell things, to engage with a community that might be excited about what you're doing, which has proven to be tried and true. As we've sold vegetables at the farmers market here in Manhattan for 10 years. It's a much smaller town. It's a much smaller percentage of the population that shops at the farmers market. It's even a smaller percentage that sees value in pasture rotated animals and organic vegetable production. But we still sort of found our customer base in the process. So.
Gotcha. And so partly you came to at least my attention because periodically Laurie would forward me emails where you kind of seem to be complaining about your customer base a bit. Is that a fair characterization? And
I try to do less and less of that, but yeah, absolutely. In the way that I write those weekly emails, there's so many cliches about farming, and the grateful farmer with the dirt under his nails, just thankful for the appreciative customer who's going to buy the sun-ripened tomato. It's not that. Farmers market selling is not that. There is certainly joy to be taken from from a lot of those interactions there, and I don't mean to minimize that, but it's also just retail, and in all retail environments, there's hard fought battles, and I do talk about that in my newsletters for sure. I try to make that portrayal as realistic without being pejorative.
Mhm. Or so.
Yeah, you know, and my wife edits out all the like really nasty.
Well, and where I enjoy them is I feel like there's this deep rooted thing in farmers where there's a sense that, to be honest, I don't think it's just farmers. I think it's actually like an endemic thing to Americans, is to be realistically negative is seen to be at the very least bad for business, and at worst is like to be an apostate from American society.
Sure.
That's a little broad, but yeah, most farmers
Yeah.
what you've written.
And I think you're right. I think it's the other way it turns, is that because I'm being negative in some context, that I'm not grateful for all the other customers. You know, but both are. It's not, you know, an either or. Both are obviously true. And the newsletter started because we started a home delivery service in the pandemic. Suddenly, we were doing a lot of business with customers that I wasn't having face-to-face interactions with anymore. I wasn't talking about the crop and how to cook it and knowing their families. And so we started it not only as a way to sort of create a connection, but also, you know, talk through the logistics of what was rapidly becoming a big part of our business in that moment. But people really responded well to when I was most honest about what was hard. And I think an important part of what we do with those newsletters and what our farm does in terms of cultivating a community around eating seasonally and locally is we make it clear that it's a responsibility. It's something that has to be done with intention as a consumer, just as what I'm doing here is very much driven by intention. And you know, in a belief, whatever is the set of beliefs that's going to sort of motivate you in the direction of shopping in a farmer's market and supporting local ag, that, you know, it's a value driven part of you have to buy food, but, you know, you can do it with purpose and intention. And I think the newsletters sort of help to create a community where people can believe more strongly in that, I guess, by not making it so rosy in its depiction, I guess.
It definitely helps me to like realize who I'm dealing with in a way, right? That I'm not dealing with somebody who's just trying to sell me stuff, but is actually right in it for the right reasons, I guess. So that's kind of how I've taken it, which I appreciate.
Oh, good. Right.
Yeah, like what are the main obstacles that you see of people not thinking seasonally and not buying locally? What have you actually seen get in the way?
Well, I mean, it's the convenience of the existing food system. It's the convenience of accessibility to all different foods at all time of year at the grocery store. You know, it's so, and in the midst of us, and us, I mean, I guess Americans broadly speaking, we began to believe that food should be inexpensive and the raw ingredient didn't really need to taste particularly good. And we just wanted it to be around all the time, everywhere. And you know, it's a cultural shift that's very different than, you know, a lot of sort of European eating culture, where not only is there sort of people are more likely to purchase more perishable food more frequently. You know, they'll shop markets more frequently, but also they'll just spend a higher portion of their budget on food without batting an eye. So, you know, I think that's primarily what we're fighting against. And, you know, if, you know, eating is a fundamental thing that everybody has to do, it's getting people to think and care about it in a way beyond just the convenience that has sort of consumed the way we think about it. I don't consider. We just wrote a really long grant application. I tried to flush some of this stuff out in the business plan, talking about my competitors. We have a pretty small community of growers here. I don't feel like the other growers in the Flint Hills that come to the Manhattan farmers markets are my competitors. I feel like my competitors are those growers who bring in shipped in produce to the farmers market. So then they're bucking the principle of the whole thing by bringing in a less expensive product during off-season times of year and creating some of those same ideas of convenience that you get from the grocery store there at the farmers market. And it's just like, well, fundamentally, what we need to be building around the farmers market is a culture where people are awaiting the first tomato, and then they're flooded with them, and then they're thankful when they're gone, because then it's pumpkin season or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's a cultural thing around convenience is probably our biggest obstacle. And then it's the other part of the convenience of the whole food system is people are less and less able to cook, maybe less and less able, or have less and less of a desire to do it. So getting people to go back to see the value in cooking and sitting as a family and having a meal. Those are at this point, antiquated in a lot of ways value sets for people. So a great manifestation of that for us is, we do poultry, and we raise Freedom Ranger chickens, it's a meat bird, but it's a French. I'm not going to say an heirloom bird. It's not exactly correct, but it's a French breed of bird that has been crossed with some of the Cornish cross lines, which are what all factory farm 99.8% of the chicken in the United States is Cornish cross. But the Freedom Ranger is a little bit truer to its French shape, which means it doesn't have huge breasts on it. It's a leaner chicken, and it's more resilient on pasture. It does better on open grass. It's able to forage better. It takes more weeks to reach a proper slaughter weight, but we didn't want to sell chickens as a cut up. We only wanted to sell whole birds, and it works out for us to do the Freedom Ranger then, not only because we think it's better, it's a more sustainable bird on pasture, but also because we're only selling whole birds, the Freedom Ranger wouldn't cut down, break up. You couldn't do cut ups with it very easily because the breasts are so lean. But it also just speaks to our sort of ethical commitment that I sort of want to do away with the convenience of the skinless, boneless chicken breast. I think that, as a culture, if we're going to sit down and eat a chicken, you should eat a whole one, and it should probably be an event you celebrate with your family and friends. And it shouldn't be the fast convenience that we've turned chicken into. So, and that's a sort of fundamentally for us, that's just a way that we try to speak to the importance of, I don't know, seeing value in the animal proteins that you're eating, I guess. But how about Spencer? How much do you guys charge for your eggs?
Well, we've got 20 to 30 birds, and we mostly just give them to neighbors and eat them ourselves.
Oh, really? Okay. I heard you lamenting trying to sell them in one of the other.
Definitely. I've tried to sell a lot of lettuce. I would bet I was talking about lettuce in the past.
Oh, okay.
We used to manage an aquaponics lettuce system, just 8 minutes from downtown Kansas City.
Okay.
And we were selling them anywhere. I wanted to get more $11 or $12, but we've wholesaled them for $9 a pound for the food hub.
Like a lettuce mix kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Either just plain Salanova lettuces from Johnny's, or with a value added would be add in baby greens.
Sure.
So, And I mostly have not been successful at that. To the extent I have, it's been with the food hub being successful doing sales and then us just giving them everything we can. And
Sure.
it sounds like similar to you, if I heard you right, that like 2020 was a good year for sales because everybody was freaking out about where's their food coming from. For like a year, it resonated on people like food is like not just a convenience and a and like how do I get enough fuel to survive, but like it's an ecological thing, it's a social thing, and it's how we flourish. And then I
Sure.
feel like in 21 we returned to like the old normal or whatever.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hope, certainly as our online platform accelerated and we were sort of aggregating more and more product from a lot of other small farms. There was a lot of hope that there was going to be some, systemic break in the way that people viewed their food, which I was happy to sort of nod my head along with when the farmers were telling me that, but I just never, I mean, too much of the way that we consume is built around convenience. So there was just no way that I saw it as a long-term systemic change to that.
Mhm.
And it wasn't. And honestly, what happened for some of the farms that we worked with, and they had been small farmers market producers, and they were suddenly, double or tripling their cow herd, and they were buying more feeder pigs, and then in 2021 they couldn't sell them, and some of them have gone out of business since then. Sort of expanded, grew too fast, I guess, or so.
Yeah. And that's probably tied up in the same way that you weren't drinking the Kool-Aid in 2020. It's also probably, at least I can see the connection between, writing somewhat testy emails to the customer base because you're not just living in a world of like you wish this will happen.
Right.
Like in the Catholic theological tradition, there's a distinguishment between like hope and wishing.
Right.
And hoping is like there has to be a realistic basis to hope. And then wishing is just I would like to grow wings and fly or something like that.
Sure.
And it where it's kind of alienating to me to be around a lot of farmers is that I feel like there's a lot of wishing and they're calling it hoping and or just being realistic.
Yes. I certainly come across new small farmers all the time that, read a book and saw a YouTube video and think that this is going to happen easily. That the success as a small farm is going to be easily attainable, and it's not. It never is. Most people that I meet who tell me they want to go start and be a small farm, they want to have a small market farm. My first question to them is, well, where have you interned already? Because I think farming is no different than being, in some ways, it's a practice skill like being a plumber or a doctor doing a residency or whatever the skilled trade you want to compare it is to a certain extent. You got to see somebody else succeed and fail at it for a while before you start to shape around the concept of what it is that you're going to do. And what happens is then if the person doesn't do that, their learning curve just seems to be endlessly longer. And the years, if it's already going to be 3 to 5 years before you're going to be remotely breaking even, that just gets a longer, harder, and I think less sustainable. And I don't mean in the environmental sense. I think I'm talking about in the personal sense, journey, without having a sort of foundational experiences to help shape the farmer that you want to be, I guess.
Yeah. No, and I think if I could go back in time like 5 years ago, even though I did a lot of, I woofed for a full year after college. I'd done an internship, and like apprenticeships on other farms. Like I didn't come in just thinking I could do it, but I thought I could leverage what I'd learned on all my travels, and I could rely on friends and hopefully other people in the social, like in the urban farming scene here. I thought like all those three things combined would count for more than it seems to have, I think.
Sure.
And I would tell myself, well, actually, you should probably expect this to just be a 7-year investment for you to even be able to hope instead of wish that this will work out. Because I guess I view that where, and tell me what you think about this, where farming is different than just having a skill is, like if I'm a surgeon, I could transfer wherever in the country and still be a surgeon. But
Right.
like you can't transplant your farm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think I've known lots of growers who, in the end, they'll blame it on the environment as opposed to the system they've built in the environment, and they'll uproot and move to a new spot where soil is better, the farmers markets are more vibrant, but if they bring the baggage of a production system that is unsustainable in terms of the expectations of how much they're going to work is a pretty easy one. It doesn't matter where you are,
because there you are and you're still in America.
right. Yeah.
Well, one thing that comes up with my students quite a bit is this issue of affordability. I teach environmental political thought, and we do have an emphasis on agriculture. I have them read Pollen, and we talk about, the advantages and disadvantages of local agriculture for the environment. And what I get is that they seem to be really aware that like people without a lot of money can't afford locally grown organic food, and that they're sort of like forced to buy stuff from Aldi's and Walmart and stuff like that, which does seem to be the case. I mean, um, and one of the things I say to them is if the U.S. government subsidized local farming at the rate it does, the sort of like monoculture, big ag type of farming, that we'd be able to get those prices down. And so I was wondering what you thought about the whole price problem, first of all, because I'm sure you've heard that a lot, and then like whether it really would matter if the government kind of flipped its priorities. Because I mean, this is something I don't feel I could get a lot of like traction with anybody with this, but I still think that among the reasons why we should flip our support is because it's a national security issue to be able to feed yourself with a diversity of food. And so it's actually a national interest to do so, but for whatever reason, we don't think that way. So like, anyway, sorry, I've thrown a lot at you, but like, maybe address the price point issue, and then, government involvement, and whether you think that it ought to be changed.
Yeah, I guess, from the government involvement perspective, be it a subsidy or, accessible crop insurance, it doesn't exist for a diversified market farm. It could work for large scale vegetable agriculture. I mean, we had an experience with this in 2020. There was a rainstorm here. We got about 3 inches of rain in an hour. And it was in early May, and it was, the height of baby lettuce season for us. And so I had 5 100-foot beds in lettuce mix production, and lots of other spring greens and all that. And the rain was just so strong that it turned the lettuce mix to soup. It shredded the chard. It wrecked the carrot tops. And so I called my local farm service office, and their approach to trying to file a claim was that I would have to leave the crop residue in place for up to 2 months to see if anything grew back.
Yeah.
And if nothing grew back, then I could try to file a monetary claim. The whole thing was all very suspicious to them anyway, because the storm wasn't recognized as a it has to reach a certain like recognition through NOAA of being like a significant weather event for claims to be filed anyway, and it wasn't that for them. But from a diversified small farm perspective, like me, if I'm triple, quadruple planting a bed in a year, I don't have 2 months to lay a bed fallow to wait for a claim to come along. I mean, I just immediately need to turn it in and replant and just keep going. In terms of the crop insurance and the subsidy thing, the industrial agricultural system in this country is built around the production of food for cows with really great efficiency. And it is a pretty cut and dry way of cropping that has a lot of unsustainable components to it. It is maybe entirely unsustainable. But it is more than 90% of the agriculture in this country. And there's a lot of large scale vested interest in it that has a sort of, lobbying and market share capabilities that small farms just don't have. The small farming is so insulating on its own. The communities that are built of small farmers, they just we're not a strong lobbying contingent. I see in the 10 years that I've done this, more and more grant opportunities coming along, both at a federal and state level, to support the kind of agriculture that I'm doing. So I sort of try to gild the lily a little bit here, that are really valuable. But without a full upending of the way the system is currently progressing, I don't see a lot of significant change happening in that. I think the upending of the system is going to happen when we run out of water, which will happen sooner than people realize, particularly here in Kansas. So that will certainly change the way agriculture happens. And I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime. It'll certainly be in my daughter's. So I guess that's the unoptimistic answer I have to your question about subsidies.
Yeah.
In terms of price,
forces it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I used to think more, I think in some of the ways some of the thematics that I hear in this podcast in more sort of sweeping cultural change sort of movements. And I don't, as this business has grown, I have a 60-acre claim here where I can affect a lot of change at a small local level. And I think the better use of my years on this planet is to really dig into that, to take the thing I'm doing here, the thing that I see in my hands, and try to change the community around me as much as I can. And if in the process I'm letting go of bigger hopes for larger societal change, that's a take I'm willing to give, So and I know that maybe that's not I'm not saying that that's the right answer. I guess I'm just saying that for me here, as as this farm, flows through, everything I do here, I want to use it as a vehicle and as a claim to change things. But I see the impact of what we do at a local level as the more important piece.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in terms of your conversation about price, price is hard. As a small scale organic farmer, most of my demographic of consumers have expendable income. Farmers markets can do a lot to empower those who receive government subsidies for food to double their dollars. I mean, as entities, farmers markets in most often can apply for federal grants that will double their dollars, if not triple them. So, somebody who's living off of food stamps can go to the farmers market, swipe their food stamp card for $20 and have $60 to spend at the market.
Wow.
A good day, if not 40, but always double it.
Do they? I mean, do you see that happen?
Yeah,
Okay.
we see it. But it also, I mean, it takes a demographic of food stamp consumers to get up on a Saturday morning and get down to the market, which is not easy. If they're, multiple jobs, many kids, all those sort of things that create those circumstance anyway. But convincing people that food should cost more is hard. But I think it's a big piece of it's, I guess to go sort of full circle, it comes back to what I see as the perceived value in the emails that I write, and the idea that I'm convincing consumers who are reading our emails or engaging with our farm that our food is, the way that you eat is of value and it is of importance, and you can spend your dollars with intent, and you can be more fulfilled by your food than just sustenance. I mean, you can feel, besides hopefully it tasting a lot better, you can see value in what you're consuming. So that's my general answer to price. At least in Manhattan, Kansas, and this certainly is not the experiences that I've had in Chicago markets or DC markets, and I didn't, honestly, in Champaign-Urbana, it was not as much of a thing. But in Manhattan, there's a demographic of shoppers who think they're coming to the market to get a deal. Like, they're going to come to the farmer's market and the food is going to be cheaper. The eggs are going to be cheaper. And, I don't have a lot of patience for those customers. And I make it pretty clear to them that I don't.
I wasn't aware of that. That's a fairly big contingent of people.
Yeah, I mean, there's and I think it goes back to a trope of the broke poor farmer, and I just I don't have the patience for that. In the instance of something like eggs, I mean, if you're buying a grade A egg in a grocery store, it's within a month that the chicken has laid it, that you're seeing it in the back corner at the grocery store. And there's a good chance the grocery store is selling it as a lost lead because they're hoping you're going to buy something else on your way back to the eggs. But if you would think that you would then come to a farmer's market and buy an egg that was, approximately still warm from the chicken's butt, and that it would cost less than those ones in the grocery store, that customer can just walk on. I don't. If the customer's first question to me about my eggs at the farmer's market is how much do they cost, it will be the last thing I will tell them about my eggs in answering that question.
Yeah.
Like
For
so.
whatever it's worth, I think I have like a semi-reasonable defense of their position.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Which I agree with you. I have contempt for it. but there's a guy, this has been hammered home because like one of the most involved people around us, he like helps out with the homesteading, but he like does not get the ecological or sort of the economic reasons why we need to build up small farms. But he's seen like all the YouTube videos about how industrial farming's stupid. We shouldn't be feeding all these grains to chickens. They should be out on pasture. You know, yeah, they should have some supplemental for grain, but mostly they should be foraging. So like I've learned from him that his whole perspective of what organic farming and homesteading is to be cheaper. Because if we're not doing it the stupid industrial way, then nothing costs as much money. Which misses the point that like when you have like billions of dollars invested in these economies of scale to make things cheap and all these subsidies, of course it's going to be cheap. Like your little homespun way of doing things will be more expensive if you ever begin to factor in your labor. But
Yeah.
but that doesn't fit within this, you know, kind of classical liberal Jeffersonian American ideal of like the American Gothic.
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's also to not see industrial ag as a system just built to streamline efficiency is just missing the point, because that's the whole idea behind it, is that by streamlining efficiency in that process, they are able to make things cheaper. And fundamentally, hand washing eggs is a lot less efficient than what happens in a in an industrial chicken facility where the cages are built so that the eggs are never dirty anyway. So yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I mean, for me, the way I think about the industrial food system is, they're able to create such cheap food because they've built entire industries that have no diversity to them. They just have extreme efficiency, which makes them more likely to break and makes them a lot less environmentally sustainable. But makes things cheaper.
Right. Well, and it's really hard to part of what we're talking about on all this is we're talking about this like super personal macroeconomic, these very like abstract things, and people are like, but I have money and I have eggs, and like it's like too much for them to like conceptualize, and even if they can conceptualize it, like to get them to like change their behaviors or their habits or the culture, it's like too much. Like while you were talking a little while ago, I Googled like the etymology for convenient. And at least according to Google, it says it's from like the late Middle English for befitting or becoming or suitable. And maybe it's telling that in America we mostly mean what's becoming and fitting and suitable is just like as fast as possible.
Right. Yeah.
With as little effort as possible.
Right.
But and I was Googling it because I was readying a question about how I was shocked. I went to McDonald's like 6 months ago for somebody, and it wasn't even cheap.
Oh no.
Right.
Like it was as much if I were to like order something, if it would pick up at a restaurant, at like a nicer sit down restaurant. And it occurred to me like, well, even McDonald's is in such a crisis that their food is only convenient. It's not even cheap anymore.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. And yet I guess there's still this lag. And maybe it's a kind of convenience to not have to update our like perceptions, but we still, I feel like the average American thinks fast food's cheap, but it's not cheap. It's just convenient.
It's convenient. Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of like a rant, but do you have anything to say to
that? Yeah, I think I certainly think the convenience of corporate fast food, is, the other part of thinking about producing food for us is, and we actually talk about this with our daughter quite a bit as she's sort of she's 6, so she's not exactly a consumer, but she's becoming aware that there's lots of different places that we could be eating. And we are endlessly harping the idea of an independently owned business, and the idea that if we're gonna eat out, we're gonna do so at a business that's going to keep the money locally, and we're gonna go to a place where hopefully the food is still made from scratch. And I just think some of those values around consumption are lost, and they've been supplanted by, you know, convenience, I guess is the working word here. You know, in Manhattan, there's an incredible amount of food establishments, but the demographic of them that is independently owned and or makes things from scratch is diminishing. And so figuring out how to make that value a primacy for our child is I see the fight there. I see the fight there as she's in kindergarten and she's wondering why she's never eaten at a McDonald's, and she's wondering why the coupons that she's getting for good behavior that give her a free meal at Texas Roadhouse are not getting used.
And yet you keep going. So what gives you hope in all this?
Oh, I don't as much have hope as I have a strong belief that I'm right.
Okay.
And I'm right as well in the sense that I think that what the decisions we're making here as a farm and are going to be the best thing I can do to leave the world I want left behind. And I guess I should qualify with we are the support that we have from Manhattan in Manhattan has been surprising to us. We had assumed when we wrote the plan for what was going to happen with this farm that at this point we would be far afield in terms of which markets we would be attending, because there just was not going to be the demographic of people in this community to support us. We had always assumed that it would be sort of our prime base, but we shop for farmland contingent on being in a college town, but being within a 2-hour drive of larger farmers market communities, so that when we exceeded what we imagined to be the limited capacity of the market share here, that we would move on. I mean, we wouldn't move on, but we would expand beyond it. But there is something hopeful in the fact that we've been able to build a dedicated demographic of consumers here that really see great value in what we do, just in the sense that it sort of bucked the trend of what I anticipated it to be.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you had to name, like I know that being right is important. So like, that would maybe be number one, just feeling that you're doing what you think is right. But what are some other benefits that you've noticed in your own life and the life of your family in pursuing this type of work, even though it is pretty hard and it's kind of risky, but like, what have you all like personally gained, maybe on a daily basis or in the long haul too, from doing this, as opposed to maybe just getting a job with a salary or something like that?
Well, in terms of the intimacy of the relationship that I share with my wife of building this business together and suffering through the challenges of it, has certainly strengthened our relationship in a way that I could have never imagined. We just, and I don't think it's certainly we celebrate the successes together, but it's the way that we manage the disasters together, and the process of rebuilding when things go terribly wrong that I think strengthen us more. And that has been an added benefit to what we do that I didn't anticipate. I assumed that raising a child in this environment was going to be hugely gratifying, but I am again and again sort of blown away by how different she is than I was at that age, and how she has an appreciation for her environment and the food she eats and the place that she lives that I just never. I mean, I was a kid from the suburbs, but she sees value in our farm in a really inspiring way. So those are the first two that sort of immediately come to mind for me. And I would also just push back on your question as well a little bit and say, there's a part of this lifestyle that is really challenging with extended family, because they either can't see the value in don't see as much value in what you're doing as maybe you see, and they don't understand the work that it takes. My mother is hugely supportive of our farm, but when she visits, the all-consuming nature of owning a farm is constantly sort of a little overwhelming for her in some ways. Having the farm initially brought my dad more into my life than he had ever been, because he saw it as a project. I mean, it is, it's an endless list of projects. And he was engaged with the concept of building it up as, sort of as first generation. So as building the greenhouses and building the chicken houses and all those things. But he doesn't have a lot of value around eating seasonally and eating locally, and he doesn't shop farmers markets, and he sees food. I mean, he was one of 12 children in a large Catholic family in Minnesota, and he just doesn't see value in spending more on local and seasonal food. And as a result, also at some point sort of balks at the effort here, because the value of the work that we have in it is not the same for him.
Real quick, do you have a read on like how it's possible to have been raised on a farm and have your son starting a farm and be all into this and like not get it?
Well, he wasn't raised on a farm.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said he was.
No, he was one of 12 kids. I mean, his father owned a greenhouse business that went belly up. But well, okay. I think there were some parts of his family and that upbringing that he was quick to run away from. But and he had a very successful professional career. He's a man with expendable income, but he doesn't see value in using that expendable income to eat in a different way. And I don't begrudge him his values. I mean, but I think as a result, some of the work here, our inability to go and visit him because our vacation time is limited, things like that are hard for him to understand.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience. Even I have. I'm not doing that kind of work, but I became a professor in a family that primarily didn't think that women were supposed to work outside the home. And so, instead of looking at that like, an accomplishment. It was definitely like reacted to by my extended family as some sort of failure. And so like it does particularly bother you, doesn't it, when people who are really supposed to be kind of close to you aren't willing to kind of like, I don't know, move into your space and realize how important that is to you and maybe learn a little bit from you.
Sure. Yeah.
It's yeah, it kind of presents you with this question, well, how could I communicate this in a way that even my family would understand, right? Right? Like yeah, it's yeah.
Or learning to come to terms with the fact that um, there's going to be some that are just never going to get it, and that
Right.
it could even be somebody that loves you unconditionally.
Right. They love you despite the fact that you're a farmer.
Right. Yeah. Right. Um, so
Yeah. Yeah, I think that resonates. Um, but and it's a generational thing too, I think, because people from previous generations, I think, I don't know about your dad, but anybody who's sort of like pulled their family, like kind of pulled out of poverty or pulled out of, uncomfortable circumstances into some degree of comfort, like my dad did, just because he lived through the Great Depression and then, through the boom, and he ended up being a professional, but he did work in construction and on farms when he was young. And that was rough. And he sort of associated rising up in income level with not having to do that kind of work anymore. So,
mhm.
so like from his perspective and a lot of people's perspective from that generation, success was not working with your hands. It was getting away from that.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So I think that's part of it still, don't you? I mean, that it's just like manual labor is sort of downgraded.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Right. Even though it's like I tell people about this line of work because just watching Spencer do it and just you guys and other people who do it. And my dad and I do a lot of like gardening, so we're like mini cases of this, but like it requires a lot of problem solving skills.
Yeah. For
It
sure.
is not some sort of just recipe book situation. You're constantly having to think creatively and solve problems constantly, and they're never standard problems.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like the difference between being I don't know, like somebody who puts together modular homes and somebody who does a custom house.
Sure.
There's a lot of brains goes into the custom house,
Right. Yeah.
but it doesn't get the
We build
respect.
a lot fewer of them than the modular homes, for sure.
Right, right, right. But it doesn't get the respect in our culture, and it still doesn't, although that maybe that's changing a little bit now.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think certainly part of what I'm keen on instilling through our businesses to, make the farmer into a more respectable part of society. And I think part of that is also sort of, there's such a broken connection between, how the food was grown and the person who's eating it, that, you know, normalizing the farmer as just an occupation, a respectable occupation, or an equal member of society. I think, we're pretty keen on building that understanding, I guess. I'm not articulating that exactly correct, but I feel like I'm often there's preconceived notions about a farmer in terms of, how worldly their view can be, how financially adept they can be, whether or not they're liberal, those things, and I'm interested in trying to fight against a lot of those stereotypes in some way.
Mhm.
So
That's part of the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, so I know we're running out of time, but you'd mentioned wanting to make a sales pitch about why farmers markets are actually great. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, I often, when I talk about farming, and people say, well, what are the major components of being a farmer? The first part I always say is you have to be a good salesman, and having deep retail experience helps significantly, because I one out of every, I don't know, 7 to 10 people that comes up to the market probably is not going to buy anything, or they're going to be turned off by the price, or they have no idea what a Hockerai turnip is, and they think that kale tastes bad. And um, there's a resiliency to being able to um, still be very inspired retailer in the farmers market setting amidst the failures that we see when we train market staff, when they sort of get used to trying to sell something and then being shot down. That for me, I train people to run the market booth with the mentality that they have crossed the threshold into your store by stepping into your market booth. So they have some interest in the things that you have inside there. They've taken the time to come out here on a Saturday morning, so there's a good chance that they are somewhat inspired by the idea of eating seasonally and locally. So if you can just figure out the right place to connect with them on, maybe you can help build interest and movement around seasonal food. But at the same time, you have to be able to deal with the possibility that they're not going to buy anything at all, which I think is one of the more frustrating pieces of retail, is to understand that not everybody's going to believe in the thing that you're pitching. I don't know if that's a great sales pitch for farmers markets. But for us, the market is not only a place where we sell our wares and a place where Allison and I celebrate our hard work in the transaction with gratified customers, but it's also a place where we have made our friends in Manhattan and built our communities and watched kids grow up, and have our best relationships with our best interactions with fellow growers, which otherwise it's pretty limited contact. And as a space in a community, as a space where a whole separate version of a community can form and thrive, I think is of great value. And there's really nothing equivalent in the way that it's not just in America, but certainly in the United States, that a community of consumers and eaters get together. There's no other space that's comparable in terms of people being inspired either by whether it's keeping money seasonally, or they're coming to get the first strawberries of June, or whatever reason drives them there. There's no comparable marketplace, community building place. So that would be my pitch, I think. It sucks. The Saturday morning part of it endlessly sucks. But
I like the fact that you cooperate with other people there, and from the perspective of the consumer, one of the problems a person has if they're coming to the market for those good reasons is having to prefer one over the other, because it's a competitive environment, which makes you feel weird, right? Because you're trying to support local agriculture, but now you've got to support one effort over the other, like you're voting, with your dollars. So the fact that you actually have cooperated with other providers and help sell their stuff too is actually a plus from my perspective. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, yeah. I like the market shopper that, they know, at least, in the Manhattan example, they know the 5 or 6 vendors that are only selling vegetables that they grow, and then they come and they have like an allocated dollar amount to each booth, so that they're making sure they're spreading it out in some capacity or another, and that may mean that they're buying something from a booth that was probably not their first choice of what they were looking for, but they're, with the intent of trying to support all those businesses at the same time. I like that.
Yeah. That's
So
cool.
Yeah, you used towards the beginning of the interview, you used the word responsibility, and I think that's a big, yeah. If what's held a lot of farmers markets together were people like those responsibilities, I would feel way different about farmers markets. And it sounds like you've got a good scene there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's like there has to be some combination of like responsibility, and then also just like enjoyment in pleasure in the eating of the thing that tastes different, like
Yeah.
the way the egg is a little more golden in color and the tomatoes juicier, and all those important pieces of the actual physical components of eating, and eating a food that was not grown for grocery market resilience, coupled with responsibility. You can build a lot of momentum there. I guess that's our hope anyway.
I think we run out of time because Nat needs to get back to work, but so I guess, but I hope we can have you back at some point. There's probably a lot more to talk about, but this was a really good conversation. So thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks. This has been a pleasure.